The track record on guys in the Ignite program has not been very positive in terms of helping lift their draft stock. And part of it is because when I talk to NBA evaluators, they just don't have it's complicated. Evaluating the Ignite context is very complicated. This year, everybody is like incredibly disappointed with it because they just aren't playing like great, real, schematically coherent basketball. Like they take basically no threes because they don't have any shooters outside of John Jenkins. They don't have great defensive consistency and competence because they have so many young guys out there. They needed, if they were going to have like 8 or 9 young guys like they have currently on this roster, they needed to be able to have like probably be able to stagger them, like have Ron Holland play a game, then Modest plays a game, have like 3 of them in the lineup at once instead of like having games where they have like 6 of them in the lineup at once. And then having young guys like surrounded by vets at all times, right? And guys that can like actually play a little bit. And I get that that's not the easiest thing in the world in the G League. But nonetheless, like there are ways to go about it that have not been good this year. But even going back through history, right? So let's talk about this. Guys that have legitimately helped their stock, and we're going to go player by player here. In 2021, they had 5 guys: Jalen Green, Jonathan Kuminga, Isaiah Todd, Dacian Nix, Kai Sato. Jalen Green, I did this preseason rank here by averaging John Gavoni and I's preseason ranking for these guys on our first mock drafts, like in the summer, right? I don't mean to like be a dickhead, but like John and I have been the standard here momentarily for a minute in terms of projecting the draft correctly, right? If you go back through like the last 5 or 6 years, like it's ours that has been the most successful. John and Jeremy beat me last year, and I think I finished second. The year before that, I finished first. The year before that, I think I finished first. John beat me like the 2 years before that. Like you can go through and like I've had a year where I finished like 5th or something when John finished that. So like I'm not sitting here and saying I get it right all the time, but I think if you look through, John and I have probably been the closest. In the preseason, we had I think John had Jalen at 2 and I had him at 3. He ends up at 2. I don't think Jalen like helped or hurt himself in the Ignite program. I think it was just a year where he kind of rolled with it. Jonathan Kuminga, I think that John had him at 6 or 7, and I had him at 5 coming into the year. He ends up going 7. I think he kind of slipped a little bit. I would say that the overall thought on his game was not quite as positive as what it was at the beginning of the season. Isaiah Todd at 2021 as well. John and I had an average rank of like 52. We both had him like late second round. He ends up going 31. I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't talk to any other team that year that had him that high. Like all well and good for the Wizards to have taken him that high. I'm glad for Isaiah Todd that he got that much money. I really wonder where it would have fallen to if he hadn't been taken there. I have a lot of questions on it. I don't really think that Isaiah Todd helped himself much in that G League season. And if you go and like you look at the numbers, they weren't like amazing. You know what I mean? Like it's not like Isaiah Todd like went out and like really truly helped himself that year. That year with the Ignite, his stats were, I think here, let's see. He played 15 games. He averaged 12 points, shot 43% from the field, had a 1-to-2 assist to turnover ratio, and averaged like 4.9 rebounds. I don't think he like really helped himself. I think the Wizards just took him very high. And when I talk to teams, I don't think that was quite where they were on him, if I'm being honest. Is that unfair to not count him as a win?
No, I think that's fair. I mean, we know how this works, especially when you get into the second round. Things can get all over the place. A team pinpoints a guy and they, hey, it's a second round pick. Even at 31, 20 spots higher than 52, we're still going to take him. I feel like at one point, I feel like Kaminga's quote unquote fall. Like I realize it's only one spot, but I remember that almost being like a 5-player draft at one point. Like it was like a big 5 of Cade, Jalen, Mobley, Barnes. And then all of a sudden we got to draft night and Suggs got ahead of him and then Giddy got ahead of him as well. So like I thought Kaminga's was somewhat significant, even if it only, and I wasn't doing this exclusively back then, so I could be misremembering, but even though it only looks like it's 1-2 spot fall, like I felt like that was somewhat like almost like he dropped a tier, even though maybe the number of spots doesn't seem that significant.
I think that's a reasonable way to put it. Dacian Nix dropped from a preseason like borderline lottery guy to undrafted. And part of that is like he put on a lot of weight in the pandemic, it seemed like, and lost some of his explosiveness. I don't know if I totally blame the Ignite for that. Like that is really, it could just be like a product of circumstances there. But having said that, like this was a lottery guy that went undrafted, and that's a bad look, frankly.
Yep.
Like he was the number 1 point guard in his high school class, and maybe everybody was wrong. And I think it's not unfair to say we were all wrong, but they didn't exactly keep up their end of the bargain. And like Kai Sato, like I don't give any, one way or another. Kai was never really on the NBA radar realistically. Apologies to Philippine fans. And ended up being undrafted and has never played in the NBA. I'm not going to sit here and go like one way or another with Kai Sato.
Yep.
2022.
This is an interesting one.
Jaden Hardy falls like way off the board. Like he goes from top 5 into the second round. That is arguably the biggest drop that you will see here. I think there's actually a case for one that is more disastrous for the Ignite, but Jaden Hardy going from a top 5 pick to being what he is and going in the second round, that is catastrophic for the G League Ignite to me. That is the one that like is crazy.
Yeah, and the only thing that saves that year is the next 2 you're about to bring up, right? Or I think we would have talked about it more.
People bring up Dyson Daniels as a win. I think Dyson was successful in spite of the Ignite. Sure. Because if you remember, they let Jaden Hardy rock with the ball for months on end.
Yep.
And Dyson was the better point guard that year. The NBA agreed that Dyson was the better point guard that year. And they didn't really position Dyson in the way that was possible. And oh, by the way, John and I had him late lottery. He went late lottery.
Yeah.
Like second half of the lottery, right? I think Dyson stayed steady more than anything. I don't think he like genuinely lifted himself from one tier to another by being with the Ignite.
Grape 8 brings up interest. Like you would watch those games and you would see Dyson Daniels really guard. And so it was like, it almost made it stand out even more, right? Like, hey, here's this kid who's showing that you can guard in the G League. And so it's almost like by being in a bad environment and playing defense the way he did, like amplified it even more to your eyes whenever you watch an Ignite game. And so I think it, in a weird roundabout awkward way, it actually helped him in terms of standing out on that end of the floor, at least.
That's right. I don't think he like helped himself necessarily by doing the Ignite though. It's kind of my take on Dyson.
Yeah.
Marjon Beauchamp undeniably helped himself.
Yeah.
He to me is the success story of the G League Ignite like trajectory to this stage. And I think he fits a model with the other guy that like has a chance to be like the major success story that we'll talk about from this season. Kind of a weird developmental pathway where he went from Chameleon BX, where like he decided to train to be a pro instead of doing college, and then went to Yakima Community College at the JUCO level, and then like, I think it was like Mike Miller had him in for workouts and like called Sharif Abdur Rahim and maybe I forget who else was involved, maybe Rod Strickland as well, and told them to like come look at Marjan in workouts. Like, we think he's a guy, and had Marjan, work out for those guys. And Marjan like proved to them, hey, like I can be like a interesting player. I'm a former top 50 recruit. I've taken this weird circuitous path. And then they got him with the Ignite. He was not a guy that anybody, myself, John, etc., NBA teams expected a ton of. And he came out and looked like a potential NBA player. We'll see where that goes. But for him to go from where he was to the first round, I think is an undeniable win for the Ignite in a ocean of losses for them.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, as I said, like his success story that year helps balance out like you could, I don't know, it's probably still a net negative, right? Whenever you add in the next guy you're about to talk about, and you talk about a guy going from top 5 into the second round, it's not like Beauchamp ended up in the lottery from undrafted, but it's not quite the L just because of his individual performance. Dyson's a, steady. Jaden Hardy drops the way he did. I'm also just kind of, as we go through this is probably the last group we can really kind of project out their careers. Like, we've talked about Jalen Green. Kuminga's finally figuring it out. Hardy, I'm just trying to think where some of these guys are going to be in the next 2 or 3 years. Like, people in the comments were bringing up, like, judging them on their second contracts. And so I was just kind of looking at the path of some of these guys and where they're on in terms of that. Like, did it help them really, not just their draft stock, Sam, but just their path into the NBA and their success in the NBA? I'm not sure you can say it helped any of them in that way either. Not that we can foresee as we're looking at it right now.
2022 continued. Michael Foster goes from, potential second round pick to undrafted. Not a great situation there. Just didn't prove enough with the Ignite. Fanbo Zhang, was kind of an interesting take from the Ignite program. I didn't love that he went that route. I thought that he should have gone to Gonzaga. I thought it would have been like a better route for him at the end of the day. But like didn't help himself. I think he ended up signing like an Exhibit 10 maybe with Indiana, and I believe is now currently back in China, if I remember correctly. Yeah, he plays for Beijing in the CBA. I would argue that is 2 losses, a win, and 2 steadies. So I think overall that's like not a great situation, but not like that's by far their best year in my opinion.
Agreed.
Last year to me was like disastrous.
Sure.
For them. Scoot Henderson falls from number 2 to number 3. The entire pre-draft cycle, this was considered a 2-person draft. Victor Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson. And credit to Brandon Miller for making it a conversation. He lifted and elevated himself into the conversation in a real way. But the reason that he did that is because the Ignite in Scoot Henderson did not have a great season that year. And in my opinion, Scoot did not get great reps and competitive reps that year. By the end, he looked incredibly bored. And honestly, I thought he played like he was just trying to get through the season, like he was hurt. For Scoot to fall from number 2 to number 3, when the entire cycle from July 1st of 2022 until, let's say, March 1st of 2023 this is a 2-person Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson draft. That is a disaster for the Ignite, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what I was saying about with Kuminga, right? It's not like you look at that, oh, he only fell 1 spot. It's way more than falling 1 spot, because that went from like, oh, Scoot versus Wemby to that became not even a conversation. And obviously, eventually Scoot wasn't even hold on, to the number 2 spot. And I remember people would question all the time, what Scoot was doing in the G League, and oh, this is against G League competition, and look at what people, obviously since I'm around the Pistons a lot, look what Saban Lee's doing in the G League, that he's putting up better numbers than Scoot Henderson and stuff like that. Like it didn't seem to hold weight to people as much as I thought it would, because like they're just like it just didn't hold weight, I guess is the best way I could say it, what he was doing. And you're right, he looked so disinterested a lot of that season. And yeah, ended up, I don't know. I wonder what some of these guys you talked about, like Zine, going somewhere else. Like, I wonder what some of these guys would have done. Like, is some of this bad decisions by the players looking at this program and going, okay, am I the right type of player to play in this situation, in this system?
Well, and I'm glad that you bring that up, because I think the next guy is a perfect encapsulation of that. Leonard Miller was kind of made to play in the G League. He is a grab and go big who can attack the basket, who can go in transition, who can really create opportunities. Leonard Miller had an outstanding season last season in the G League. And there is nothing wrong with him as a person. There are no like intel flags with Leonard. He is the epitome of somebody that should have helped himself. He went from being a borderline like top 20 guy to falling out of the first round.
Yeah. You were screaming from the rooftops. I mean, you didn't quite have him in the lottery, but you had him mid first round.
No, I had him in the lottery. I had him in the lottery.
So
I still, by the way, I would still have that, to be clear. Leonard's been fantastic in the G League.
So do you think this comes down to like this class specifically? Like, it's not just people on Twitter not kind of respecting what was done. This all of a sudden becomes NBA teams looking at what these guys did with this team and saying, either we didn't get a great evaluation of it, we don't respect it. Like, respect's a strong word, but you know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't seem meaningful. Like, it seems like this is the class where that really stood out, where NBA team said, yeah, Leonard, this was awesome, but in that context, we just really don't respect it, even though the numbers, like, because the last month or two, weren't his numbers something crazy? Like, I mean, he played really, really well.
Fantastic. He was fantastic. All of the tape was great. He worked out really well in front of teams before he had like a minor thing pop up where he wasn't able to like work out for the last like week and a half of the pre-draft cycle. There was nothing about his situation that said he shouldn't have been drafted in the first round. Nothing about his profile, at least. CD Sissoko falls from 30 to 44, whatever, goes from like end of the first round potential to mid second round. It's fine. Like, I don't know that it's going to matter. And then Mojave King goes from like 51, gets drafted 47, basically was where he was at the end of the day. This is a loss of a year. Like, truly. Yep. Scoot, Miller, Sissoko all drop in a real way. Then 2024 looks like the worst of them yet, because Ron Holland. So again, if you look at the preseason projections, he was probably the most likely guy to go number one, I would say. I have him at like 6. I think John has him right around 6. Matas Buzelis, he was, preseason top 3. I would say his range is somewhere like 4 to 12 or so. Ethan Almanza, I had him too high. I had him at 2, which is part of why this is so high, saying that he was like a top 5 guy. Hand up, I was off on that, but John had him in the top 10. Like, I wasn't alone on this. And right now he's not projected in the first round for either of us. Babacar Sané, I didn't have him mocked. John did. He's projected to go undrafted. It would be pretty stunning if he did get drafted. I did have Thierry Darlin mocked. John did not. Currently projected to go undrafted. Neither of us had London Johnson projected. The guy that is good that has helped himself is Tyler Smith. And again, a different pathway kid, turned pro immediately out of high school, went to OTE for 2 years, and has come into the Ignite program and has been productive. There are still a lot of flaws. He is a really bad defensive player right now, but he is a tremendous shooter at 6'10". who is an athlete who can be productive and has some interesting features of his game that I think probably result in him going somewhere in the first round.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see where Tyler Smith lands because he is kind of what I would say like a prototypical like four man in the NBA with the way he can stretch the floor. He plays a lot of five with the ignite as well. So, I mean, I guess that's something he can do also, but the defense has a long way to go. But we know floor spacing, especially from bigger players. I think he started to at least show some more defensive playmaking. Almanza is the one that's interesting to me where I'm trying to navigate, is this an ignite problem or should have Almanza seen this and known that playing for the ignite wasn't going to highlight his game the way it needs to be highlighted?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I think it's more that
Yeah.
than anything because they just didn't have a good guard, and he's somebody that like needs service to be able to like play. And he's not an advantage creator. He is an advantage maintainer
Yeah.
almost, or a finisher in that way where he can't like create a shot with a post up. He is, not going to drive an attack and score that way and take advantage of mismatches and things like that. He is like, you're in ball screens. He's going to roll into a post up, create a mismatch. He's going to short roll and have open space and then be able to drive or be able to pass and make the right read. I think that was probably a miscalculation on their part. But to me, it's a problem for the
Yes.
Ignite that a
Yes.
kid like that, it's a miscalculation.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to say is Almanza and his team, whatever, they should have seen that and been like, man, this isn't the best scenario. But that's an issue if a potential first round pick can't come play for you because you can't put him in an environment to succeed because you don't have a point guard. In my opinion, Sam, all four of those guys at the top of the list there are guys that could really benefit from a table setter. I think Ron Holland needs some on ball reps. But I truly think you get him off zoom action, off a pin down, something where something is created for him first, and then let him attack. Matas, I know he can do some things on ball, but again, how many catch and shoot can you get him? Some unguarded shots, attacking some closeouts. Tyler Smith, it absolutely falls into this category. And you just talked about it with Almanza. They don't have a point guard that does that. The other thing that I really disliked whenever I was watching Scoot film, they had no lob threat for him. Like I would always tell people, imagine Scoot with a guy that has real rim gravity that he can either throw it up to or holds the defender so he can get downhill a little bit better. So it's just this roster construction. I equated it in my notes, Sam, to the Detroit Pistons and the fact that you couldn't evaluate Cade, Jaden, Asar, Jalen Duren because the roster around them doesn't make sense. I feel the same way about Ron Holland, Matas Buzelis, Smith, and Almanza. I don't know how to properly evaluate them because I feel like the roster around them is so flawed. We haven't seen them in a role where they can really succeed.
So all told, looking through all of this history here, 10 or no, let's say this, 9 guys maintained their status in some way. And by the way, within there, I'm including Babacar Sane, Thierry Darlin, London Johnson, Fanbo Zhang, Kai Sato, like 5 guys that, were late seconds to undrafteds, let's call them, projected and like maintained that, right? 10 guys that hindered their stock in some way during this season. And 2 guys in Marjan Beauchamp and Tyler Smith, guys that like had weird, unique track records and backgrounds, and then ended up kind of helping themselves throughout the process, elevating themselves during it. That's pretty horrendous, man. Like a 10-2 negative to positive run. That's tough. That's a bad look for the Ignite program.
So what would be interesting, and I don't know that we have time to do this, it'd be interesting to do this with a couple major college programs and, like the NBL or something like that, right? Just to see is this kind of typical for a program in general? Like what is Kentucky's track record if we did this for the last 3 years? Like if we did it just this year with Kentucky, you would have the fall of Justin Edwards, but you would have a crazy rise for Reed and Rob. DJ probably fell based
Yeah.
on where he was preseason.
I would say Aaron Bradshaw fell as well a little
Yeah.
bit.
And so like it would just be I'm not discounting this at all. I just would be honestly, I'd want to see it for every major college program to see what programs are the best, right? We know if we went through it, we would find college programs where it would be similar to the Ignite. Don't you think? We would find some programs that have a history of
to me, the direct comparable more is the NBL, right?
Okay, sure.
Just off like the top of my head, like looking at a graphic here, right? All of LaMelo Ball, Alex Sarr, Josh Giddey, those guys like clearly helped themselves
Agreed.
in terms of putting themselves in a better position. Honestly, I think Ousmane Dieng probably helped himself a little bit going in the lottery. I still don't love Ousmane Dieng as a prospect, and I wouldn't have taken him as high as Oklahoma City did, but I think he probably helped himself by going there and like hanging out for a year.
It worked.
It worked. I think Alex Tui has probably helped himself a little bit, like this year specifically now. I think Alex Tui is in a better position than what he was in the preseason. I think Bobby Klintman is like basically maintained.
Bobby's going to
late
be an
first to
interesting
late
right.
first.
Like that.
Yeah.
If that's where he stays, then I think he did fine. Like I'm nervous that I have Bobby too high, but if that's where he ends up, then it was actually absolutely a fine decision.
Ariel Hookporty, I think, helped himself by doing the Next Stars program. AJ Johnson, I think, probably did not do himself favors, and Trenton Flowers probably did not do himself favors. Montas Rupstavicius, he, probably maintained. He's had a great season. Like, I don't think he hindered himself at all. And honestly, I think better of him than what I did coming into that program. But, John Gavoni, like John really liked him in the preseason. I could have just been missing something. I'm here to hear that out at the end of the day. I think that's a plausible outcome that I was too low. But realistically, I would say all of Sarr, Tui, Montas, Ariel Hookporty all helped themselves. Klintman probably stayed about the same or so. And then AJ Johnson and Trenton Flowers are the only two that fell. Like that's a good year for the Next Stars, right?
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing is like, do you think AJ and Trenton both stay in this class? Like AJ could go back and then come back and be a bigger, and here's my thing. And I realize this is just piling on now. I don't think either of those guys are increasing their stock if they're playing for the Ignite. Like I feel somewhat confident saying that. Like I don't think AJ goes and does that. Like honestly, like maybe in the OTEs where those guys should have went and played that way more free flowing and kind of just followed the path of the Thompson twins.
Yeah, look, I think like AJ was probably just not physically ready to play in the NBL personally.
Yeah, sure.
This is a physical league over here, and he is so skinny that like it would be hard. But truly, like this season, I would say even like just this season alone, two guys have like helped themselves like substantially in the Ignite program. And then you go back, like Giddey goes 6th overall. LaMelo Ball like was a total wild card when the Ignite took him.
Yeah.
Or when the NBL took him, and he ends up going in the top 3. Like there is just more of a track record of genuine success with the NBL Next Stars program than there is with the Ignite program. And I think it's like kind of inarguable